My name is John Henry Seeley. I was born to Wellington Seeley and Clarissa Jane Wilcox on April 29, 1955 in San Bernardino.
The grass is hard.
My parents came across the plains in 1847 with John Taylor. And when they got to Salt Lake, Brigham Young sent them to California to help settle the Mormon colony of San Bernardino. When I was 2½, we moved back to Utah and we settled in Pleasant Grove. And then in 1859, we were called to come down to Mount Pleasant, help settle Mount Pleasant. My childhood is the same as most. Life was hard on the frontier. There were few luxuries. I went barefoot most of the time because shoes were scarce and toys were even scarcer. But I had one toy. It was a board with a nail pounded in and a string tied to it. And I dragged that around for a sled. Would you like to have a toy like that? But when my little brother David died, I gave up my toy so that the board could be used to help make his coffee. That was life on the frontier. We learned very young that how to deal with sorrow and how to carry on. As a young boy, I helped my mother with the chores, and then I went with my dad and learned how to do a man's work. I herded sheep and cattle, and then and I dreamed of having my own herd someday. We worked really hard and there was little time for play. When I was nearly 15, I nearly ruined this right arm of mine. I was climbing a fence with my gun, and the gun got caught on the wire and discharged and blew through the tendon in my right hand. And from that time on, I had a stiff finger. That's why I'm not pointing at you. That's just, that finger is stiff. But my mother was determined I wouldn't be crippled, so she made me carry buckets of water and milk with this right hand to stretch that tendon. Every time I look at this finger, it reminds me of my mother's grit and my own foolishness, having that accident. At 17, I was listed as a soldier in the Black Hawk War, though I rarely spoke of it. At 21, I had nothing to my name. I began hauling mine timbers in Bingham Canyon, and then I became what I always wanted to be, a sheepman. I started with a small herd, and then I was able to become the manager of the North Sanpete Cooperative Institution sheep herd. And I worked on shares. That means part of my pay, instead of giving me money, they gave me sheep. And after 3 years, I built up a sizable herd. Now, in the mid-1880s, my dad and myself and my brothers decided to change the way we spelled our last name. We changed it from S-E-E-L-E-Y to S-E-E-L-Y to save money on the brands, because every letter in a brand cost 50 cents, and money was tight. I knew Margaret Folkman Peel all my life. She was born a few years after me in Mount Pleasant. She was the daughter of Danish converts, and in 1880, January 15th, I married her in the Salt Lake Endowment House. It was a long, snowy journey, full of hardship. My brother Wink had a small house on Main Street at about 5th South, and he wanted to move to Castle Valley, so I made arrangements to to buy the house from him for $200. And so we had 2 horses, a cow, and $35, of which we spent every penny setting up the house. We bought a chair, tables, a bed, and a stove so we could keep warm. And then a little later on, we moved to a larger house, and eventually I put a second story on that house, and we lived there comfortably for the rest of our lives. We raised 10 children together, though one, little Margaret May, passed away when she was a baby. And I felt then, as I felt when my little brother died, that the veil between joy and sorrow was very thin. I worked hard to establish my livestock business. I knew the common sheep just wasn't good enough. I wanted a better, heavier meat and thicker wool. And so I bought 140 Rambouillet sheep from California. From then on, I was hooked. I sold sheep. Well, I bred well, and I imported from France, and I built a line that became known across the United States and throughout the world. I sold sheep in Mexico, South America, Japan, and Russia. And once I sold a ram at the National Ram Sale for $6,200, which at that time was the highest amount anybody'd ever paid for a ram. I was also active in the community. I served as a councilman. I served as a constable. I served as the mayor of Mount Pleasant for several years. And then I decided to run for the state senate. And I served in the senate for 4 years. I sat on the board of the Utah State Fair, and I worked tirelessly in the Rambouillet Breeders Association. Still, my greatest joys were at home. Margaret knew that I loved her, and my kids, I never went anywhere that I didn't come home and bring her something, even if it was just a little present, okay? My children knew my love, though they knew I expected respect. No sliding down the banister, and no rowdiness at the table. I always told them that banisters are for hands, not for behinds. But I also always kept mints in this pocket, so any child or grandchild that wanted to crawl up on my lap and fish one out could do that. I was not content to prosper alone, so I helped establish the Mount Pleasant Roller Mill in town, the electric company, and the Wool Livestock Commission. I owned a sawmill in the canyon and a planing mill in town. And I loved company. I never did want to be alone. So I never did learn to drive a car, and I'd never have to go anywhere alone. I also wanted to help people. So if a man came to me hungry, I gave him a bed and a meal. If a man came to me disgraced, I gave him work and a chance. Even one time, a convicted cattle rustler came to me, and he found employment with me. I love to go fishing at Fish Lake. We always stayed at a cabin, a lodge of Dock Easton on the southwest end of the lake. And we had several family reunions there. One time, I and my wife and brothers and sisters went up to fish. It was a hot day, and I spent most of the morning out on the lake. At about 11 o'clock, I came in. I was tired, so I went to lay down, and I told Margaret to wake me up when lunch was ready. When they came in to wake me up, they found that I had had a stroke and was in a coma, and I died shortly after that. My funeral was large. Neighbors, family, sheepmen, senators, and a lot of townsfolk. But all of that, the flowers, the cortege, and the speeches, were not the true measure of my life. The true measure of my life was my wife Maggie, my children, my flocks on the hill, and my grandchildren that called me Grandpa.